So if you read the title, you probably know what this video is about, but I would still like to give you some context. 2 weeks ago I released a video on how ReZero and Mushoku Tensei subvert and uphold tropes respectively, and it surprised me the amount of people that said that either Mushoku Tensei was the first isekai or the originator of most tropes now associated with it, because this is just not true. Also, keep in mind that this isn't to mock anyone who said it in the video. This is just to correct a very common piece of misinformation that I find mildly annoying at this point. Now, I should probably address this before anything else. Mushoku Tensei is really fucking good. I'd even say as good as it gets when it comes to isekai. This isn't a video bashing it, I just wanted to dispel the misconceptions that came from Mushoku being called the grandfather of isekai. Now, there is a valid reason why it's been called that, but similar to a game of broken telephone, the context behind it was lost along the way, which isn't helped by the official website calling it the pioneer of Narukei novels, which implies that its influence on isekai would be like that of Dune or Lord of the Rings for sci-fi and fantasy respectively. Now let's get the less common and more easily disproven version of the claim out of the way. Mushoku Tensei wasn't the first isekai. Familiar of Zero is an isekai from 2004, and there were a lot that came even before that. But to be fair, this version of the claim is the least common. Most people just say the tropes of modern isekai originate from Mushoku Tensei. However, despite this statement being closer to the truth, it also isn't correct. And to help explain, I should bring up this little timeline. So, Mushoku Tensei was first published as a web novel in November of 2012, on a website called Shosetsuka ni Naru, which translates to Let's Become Novelists, and is more commonly known as just Naru. And if you don't know, this is where most of your favorite light novels originally come from. But, by the time that Mushoku was released, isekai was already a very sizable niche for web novels in Naru, and even for light novels outside of it. And most of the tropes we associate with isekai had already appeared in other works before it. Works such as Isekai Meiyaku de Harem O in 2011, or even almost a decade prior, with, as I've mentioned before, Familiar of Zero in 2004. Also, depending on if you consider SAO an isekai or not, which I've seen be a 50-50 debate among the isekai community, it also predates Mushoku Tensei. It was released in 2009 and carries a lot of the modern isekai DNA. Also, it was arguably more influential in the industry thanks to being among the top-selling light novels of all time. In fact, even ReZero predates it, with its web novel starting publication 7 months prior. And guys, this is a joke, please don't take it too serious, but I just love how ReZero is capable of subverting tropes that don't even exist yet, because they all came from Mushoku, right? Either way, there's still a few aspects of isekai that I've yet to address. One of them being the statement that the biggest influence of Mushoku was the reincarnation part. As before, the method for isekai was summoning, not death and rebirth. But even that didn't originate from Mushoku, as it had already been done before in works such as Knights and Magic from 2010. So, while it's often called the grandad of isekai, not only does isekai predate Mushoku Tensei, but so do most of the tropes associated with it. Mushoku took already prevalent tropes in works that came before it, compiled, expanded, and popularized them. It is in fact one of the most important works in telling the story of how isekai got as popular as it did, if not the most important. But not for creating the genre, subgenre, whatever you prefer to call it, nor for creating most of its tropes. Instead, it was for making them as popular and prevalent as they have been since. And there is, however, one trope that did come from Mushoku as far as I know, and that is the much beloved Death by Truck-kun. Once again, Mushoku deserves all the praise in the world, but not for being the first isekai or for introducing the now common tropes of isekai, but instead for being able to compile so many previously scattered tropes in a cohesive way and executing a lot of them as well as we have seen so far. I think we sometimes get too focused on who did it first and not who did it better, and thus we tend to conflate great execution with originality. And look, I'm well aware that even the works that I gave as examples can be traced back even further to others. So, what would be the more accurate way to describe Mushoku Tensei's influence? Mushoku Tensei elaborated upon a pre-existing formula. It compiled tropes and trappings of previous isekai in a cohesive manner and made them as popular as they are nowadays. And while you could say that it created the guidelines for modern isekai, you should only do so aware that those guidelines themselves were based on and very similar to the guidelines for isekai that predated. In that way, it expanded upon former isekai and in turn was used as a reference point for those that came after. This, however, does not mean it created isekai or most of its tropes. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you don't mind this week I did something a bit different. I just felt like this is something I should have explained better in my video 2 weeks ago, and so I wanted to go at it. Next week I'll be back to talk about the anime to keep an eye on for this season, and I think there are quite some hidden gems for us to discuss. So, without further ado, I'm Ayvhel, signing out.